It was a slow evening at a quiet restaurant tucked between tall glass buildings that reflected the city lights. The smell of roasted garlic and butter floated through the air, while soft jazz played in the background. Waiters moved from table to table carrying plates of pasta and bowls of soup. In one corner of the room stood an old piano covered with dust, its wooden surface marked by years of use and silence. No one had touched it in months. People came here for food and conversation, not for music anymore. Among the staff working that night was a young waitress who had been serving there for almost 2 years. She wasn't loud or talkative like some of her co-workers. She moved quietly with calm steps and a polite smile. Her hair was tied back neatly, and though her uniform looked worn, she always kept it clean. She never complained about long shifts or difficult customers. But behind her calm eyes lived a different story, one she never spoke of. She had once been a girl who loved music more than anything else in the world. She used to play the piano when she was little. Her parents weren't rich, but they had saved enough to buy her a small upright piano for her 12th birthday. She would sit for hours pressing the keys, making up small tunes and filling the tiny house with sound. Her father would often sit nearby reading the newspaper while she played. Every time she finished a song, he would clap softly and say that one day she'd play on a big stage. She believed him. Back then, the world seemed kind and full of possibilities, but life has its own rhythm and not every note is sweet. When her father passed away suddenly, everything changed. Her mother struggled to pay bills and the piano lesson stopped. The piano was eventually sold to pay for rent. The sound that once filled the house was replaced by silence, and silence became something she learned to live with. She finished school and took small jobs to help her mother. Years passed and her dream of playing again was buried under the weight of survival. That evening she was tired. Her back ached and her feet hurt from walking all day. But she kept moving, her expression calm. She had learned to hide her exhaustion behind gentle smiles. A group of wealthy men walked in, laughing loudly. They were clearly regular customers, the kind who liked attention. The manager, seeing them, gave the waitress a quick nod to make sure they were served well. She approached their table with her notepad, greeted them politely, and took their orders. One of the men, older, dressed in a dark suit with a gold watch that gleamed under the restaurant light, looked around the room with a bored expression. He noticed the piano in the corner and raised an eyebrow. "That thing ever get used?" he asked with a laugh. His friends chuckled. The waitress smiled softly and said it hadn't been played in a long time. "Shame," the man replied, tapping his fingers on the table. "Music makes a place come alive." His tone was half joking, half arrogant, the kind that made others smile out of politeness. He looked at the waitress for a moment and said suddenly, "You look like you know how to play." She froze for a second, caught off guard. "Me? No, sir," she said quietly. He smirked. "Come on. You do, don't you? You've got that look. I'm the piano type." His friends laughed again, teasing her lightly. She didn't know what to say, so she just smiled awkwardly and shook her head. But the man wasn't done. "Tell you what," he said, leaning back in his chair. "If you can play something and anything, I'll tip you $100. The restaurant grew quieter. Some nearby diners turned to see what was happening. The waitress's heart began to race. She didn't like being the center of attention, and she didn't want to look foolish. "I haven't played in years," she said softly, hoping he would drop it. He didn't. "Years or not, let's hear it," he said with a grin. $100 for one song. Seems fair." His friends were smiling, waiting to be entertained. For a moment she considered walking away, but then her eyes went to the piano. It stood there quietly, half forgotten, the same color as the one her family used to own. Something in her chest stirred. A memory, a voice from long ago. She could almost hear her father saying, "One day you'll play again." She took a slow breath and said softly, "All right." The man blinked, surprised that she agreed. She placed her tray on a nearby counter and walked toward the piano. The room grew even quieter. The only sound was the soft clinking of glasses from the bar. People leaned a little to see better. The man crossed his arms, amused, waiting to see what would happen. When she reached the piano, she gently wiped the dust off the keys with her sleeve. Her fingers hovered above them, uncertain. She hadn't touched a piano in nearly 10 years. Her hands trembled slightly. The crowd around her waited, whispering quietly. Someone turned off the background music. She took another deep breath and closed her eyes. In that moment, she wasn't a waitress anymore. She was a little girl again, sitting in her small living room, her father beside her. She could almost feel the warmth of that memory wrap around her. Without thinking, her fingers pressed the first few keys. The sound was rough at first and the piano was out of tune, but the melody began to form, gentle and familiar. It was a song she had written long ago, a simple tune she used to play for her father when he came home from work. At first, she played carefully, afraid of making mistakes. But as the notes filled the air, something inside her broke free. Her hands began to move faster, more confidently. The melody grew stronger, smoother, deeper. The restaurant was completely silent now. Every face was turned toward her. Even the chefs in the kitchen peeked through the doorway. The music carried something raw, something real, a story of love, loss, and hope. The notes seemed to speak in ways words couldn't. The melody rose and fell like waves, soft and strong at the same time. Some people in the crowd began to tear up without knowing why. It wasn't just music they were hearing. It was a piece of someone's soul. The man who had dared her sat completely still, his smirk gone. He had expected a joke, maybe a few random notes. But what he was hearing now was something different. It reminded him of a time before money, before arrogance, when he used to care about simple things. For the first time in a long while, he didn't know what to say. The waitress kept playing, lost in the music. Every note brought back a memory. Her father's laughter, the sound of rain outside the window as she practiced, the night they had to sell the piano, the quiet tears she hid afterward. The pain and beauty of those moments poured into the melody. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't stop. When the final note faded into silence, the room stayed still for several seconds. Then slowly, people began to clap. The sound grew louder and louder until it filled the whole restaurant. Some stood up, others wiped tears from their eyes. The waitress sat there stunned, her hands still resting on the keys. She hadn't expected this. She had only wanted to honor a memory, to touch the piano once more. The man stood and walked over to her. For the first time that night, he wasn't smiling arrogantly. He looked down at her and said quietly, "That was beautiful." He reached into his wallet and pulled out a few bills, holding them out to her. But she shook her head gently. "It's okay," she said. "I didn't play for money." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. As she walked back toward the counter, her coworkers stared at her with wide eyes. One of them whispered, "I didn't know you could play like that." She smiled shyly and went back to work, pretending nothing had happened. But inside, something had changed. It felt as if a locked door in her heart had opened again. The air felt lighter. She could still feel the piano keys under her fingertips. The rest of the night passed in a quiet, almost dreamlike haze. Customers kept glancing at her, smiling, whispering to each other. Some even came up to say how beautiful the music was. She thanked them politely, though part of her felt embarrassed by all the attention. The millionaire and his friends stayed until closing, their laughter softer now, their voices calmer. Before leaving, the man walked up to her once more. "Do you play anywhere else?" he asked. She shook her head. "I used to a long time ago," she said. He nodded thoughtfully. "You shouldn't stop," he said. "You have something rare. Don't waste it." Then he left, leaving a few large bills on the table, far more than he had promised. After the restaurant closed, she stayed behind to clean. The piano still sat quietly in the corner. She walked over and placed her hand on it one last time. A faint smile touched her lips. It was the first real smile she'd had in months. When she finally stepped outside, the night air was cool and the city was glowing with lights. She pulled her coat tighter and began walking home, her heart still warm from what had happened. The sound of her music seemed to follow her, not loud, not fading, just there, softly reminding her of who she once was. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of something she thought she had lost forever. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about remembering a part of herself that had been silent for too long. As she walked down the empty street, she whispered quietly, "Thank you, Dad," and smiled to the sky. The next morning, the waitress woke up earlier than usual. The sunlight slipped through the thin curtains of her small apartment, warming the room in soft shades of gold. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of traffic outside. Her mind went back to the night before. The piano, the silence, the sound of clapping and the strange look in the millionaire's eyes. It felt like a dream, but she knew it had really happened. She got up slowly and made herself a cup of coffee. The small kitchen smelled faintly of toast and detergent. She stood by the window holding the cup close and watched people hurrying down the street below. Students, office workers, an old man walking his dog. It was an ordinary day for everyone else, but for her, something inside felt different. The feeling from last night hadn't left. It was as if the music was still echoing somewhere deep inside her. When she got to work, the restaurant was quieter than usual. The morning shift was mostly cleaning and setting tables before lunch. She tied her apron and started polishing glasses. Her coworker came over with a grin. "You were a star last night," he said. She laughed softly, embarrassed. "Please don't start," she said. But he kept teasing her kindly, saying the whole kitchen was talking about her playing. Even the manager mentioned it when he walked by. He told her customers had been asking about her, wanting to know if she would play again. She smiled but didn't promise anything. The truth was, she didn't even know if she could play like that again. It had just happened. She hadn't planned it, hadn't practiced in years. It was like something inside her had come alive for a brief moment and then gone quiet again. By lunchtime, the restaurant began to fill up. The piano in the corner was still there, its keys gleaming faintly after she had wiped them the night before. Every time she walked past it, she felt her chest tighten. She wondered if she would ever play again. Around mid-afternoon, when the crowd thinned out, the same millionaire from last night walked in. He wasn't with his friends this time. He came alone, wearing a simpler jacket, no gold watch, no loud laugh. The waitress noticed him the moment he entered. She hesitated before walking over. "Good afternoon," she said politely. He smiled, but not the smug smile from before. This one seemed real. "Good afternoon," he replied. "I wasn't sure if you'd be here today." "I work most days," she said, trying to sound casual. He nodded and sat down at his usual table. "I came back to thank you," he said after a pause. "Last night was something I can't stop thinking about." She looked at him curiously, unsure what to say. He continued, "You reminded me of something I forgot a long time ago. That feeling, when something moves you so deeply you can't explain it. You gave that to everyone last night." She felt her cheeks warm. "I just played what I remembered," she said softly. He smiled again. "That's exactly what made it beautiful." He looked toward the piano. "You know," he said slowly, "I wasn't joking when I said you shouldn't stop. Have you ever thought about playing again? Really playing?" She hesitated, her hands tightening around her notepad. "I used to," she said. "But that was a long time ago. Life doesn't really give me time for that anymore." He leaned forward slightly. "What if I helped you? I have a small event space downtown. We host charity dinners, small concerts, things like that. Maybe you could play there one night." She stared at him in surprise. "Me? I haven't performed in years," she said quickly. "I'm not good enough for that." "You're wrong," he said calmly. "You have something people can feel. That's worth more than perfection." For a moment, she didn't speak. The restaurant buzzed quietly around them, the clinking of glasses, the low hum of conversation, but everything seemed far away. She didn't know if she should believe him. Offers like this didn't happen to people like her. But his eyes didn't look mocking anymore. They looked sincere. She shook her head gently. "I appreciate it," she said. "But I wouldn't even know where to start." He smiled faintly. "Start by saying yes. I'll take care of the rest." She looked down at her order pad, unsure how to respond. "Let me think about it," she said finally. He nodded and didn't push further. When she brought him his meal later, they talked a little more. Not about money or music, but about simple things. The city, the weather, life. He seemed different and quieter, kinder. When he left, he said, "Don't let fear decide for you." That night, she couldn't stop thinking about his words. After her shift ended, she stayed behind again to clean. The restaurant was empty except for the quiet hum of the refrigerator. She walked over to the piano and sat down. Her hands hovered above the keys. She played a few notes, soft, hesitant. The sound filled the empty room. It felt strange and comforting at the same time. The keys were slightly uneven, the tuning imperfect, but it didn't matter. She played a little longer, losing track of time. When she finally looked up, she realized she had been playing for nearly an hour. She stood, locked up the restaurant, and walked home through the quiet streets. The city lights glowed softly against the night sky. She couldn't help smiling. Maybe the man was right. Maybe fear had kept her from doing what she loved for too long. The next few days passed quickly. She worked her usual shifts, but something had changed. She hummed quietly while setting tables, her mood lighter. Even her co-workers noticed. One afternoon, she found a small card on the counter with her name on it. Inside was a short message. "I meant what I said. Let's make it happen." The man from the corner table. At the bottom was a phone number. She stared at it for a long moment, unsure whether to laugh or cry. It felt unreal. After her shift, she sat at the bus stop holding the card, thinking. Part of her wanted to call right away. Another part whispered that she shouldn't get her hopes up. People made promises they didn't keep all the time. But something told her this was different. She took out her phone and dialed the number. He answered almost immediately. "I was hoping you'd call," he said. His voice was calm, friendly. "I'm not sure I can really do what you're asking," she said honestly. "You can," he said simply. "You just need a little help. I'll arrange a small rehearsal space and a piano teacher. You don't owe me anything. Just play." His tone was firm but kind. After a moment of silence, she said quietly, "All right, I'll try." The following week, she found herself standing outside a small music studio tucked in an old brick building. The sign above the door read Harmony House. Inside, the smell of polished wood and sheet music filled the air. A middle-aged man greeted her warmly and introduced himself as her instructor. "He told me about you," he said with a smile. "Said you have a gift." She blushed and shook her head. "I just play what I feel," she said. "That's the best kind of playing," he replied. For the first time in years, she sat at a real piano again, not an old restaurant instrument, but a polished grand piano that glistened under the light. When her fingers touched the keys, she felt something familiar and strange at once, like meeting an old friend after many years. The first few minutes were awkward. Her hands were stiff, her rhythm uneven, but with gentle guidance the music began to flow again. Day after day she practiced. After work she would rush to the studio for an hour before going home. The teacher encouraged her, helping her rebuild confidence and control. Slowly she began to play not just from memory but from her heart again. The music filled her evenings with a kind of peace she hadn't felt in years. One evening, as she was finishing a song, she noticed the millionaire standing quietly at the doorway, listening. He clapped softly when she stopped. "You've been working hard," he said. She smiled shyly. "Trying to," she replied. "You're ready," he said. "Ready for what?" "For your first performance." Her stomach twisted. "I'm not ready for that," she said quickly. "I still make mistakes," he shook his head. "Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what you make people feel. That's something you already do." She wanted to argue, but deep down she knew he was right. The fear in her chest wasn't because she couldn't play. It was because she cared too much. The performance was set for a small charity event 2 weeks later at his venue downtown. It wasn't huge, just 50 or 60 people, but to her it felt like 1,000. Every day leading up to it she practiced until her fingers ached. She even played the same melody she had performed at the restaurant, refining it, adding layers of emotion. It was her story, her past, her voice through music. On the night of the event, she stood backstage, her hands trembling. The room beyond the curtain buzzed with quiet conversation. She could hear the clinking of glasses, the rustle of chairs. The millionaire came to see her before she went on. "No matter what happens out there," he said softly, "remember, they don't want perfection. They want honesty. Just be you." She nodded, her throat tight with emotion. When her name was announced, she stepped out to the small stage. The lights were soft and warm. The piano waited at the center, gleaming. She sat down, her fingers brushing the keys. The crowd fell silent. She took a deep breath. The first note rang out, then the next. The melody rose gently, carrying her story with it. As she played, the fear melted away. She wasn't the waitress anymore. She wasn't the girl who gave up her dream. She was the person her father had believed in, the girl who could make people feel something real. The room listened, silent and still, as her music wrapped around them. When the final note faded, the silence broke into soft applause, then louder, until the whole room was clapping. She bowed her head, tears shining in her eyes. That night, she walked home under the quiet sky, the sound of applause echoing in her heart. She smiled to herself. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly alive again. The night after her first performance, she could hardly sleep. The sound of applause kept playing in her head again and again, like an echo that refused to fade. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces in the audience, the way they had listened, the way they had clapped, and the way some had even wiped their eyes. It felt unreal. For years she had worked quietly, unnoticed, just another person blending into the background. But that night she had felt seen. When morning came, she woke with the same strange mix of disbelief and joy. She made herself tea and sat by the small window in her apartment, looking out at the sunlight touching the rooftops. She thought about everything that had happened in such a short time: the dare, the piano, the offer, and the concert. It felt like life had opened a door she didn't even know was still there. At work, everyone congratulated her. Her coworkers said they had watched a video from the event that someone posted online. It had already started to spread. People sharing the clip of a waitress who played piano so beautifully that she brought a room full of strangers to tears. She couldn't believe it. The manager smiled proudly and even told her that a few new customers had come in asking to see the pianist waitress. The piano in the corner no longer looked lonely. It looked alive again, like it was waiting for her. During quiet hours, she would sometimes sit there for a few minutes and play softly. The regular customers began to expect it. Small bursts of music between the sound of plates and laughter. Some would even pause their meals to listen. She didn't do it for attention. She played because it made her happy again. One afternoon, as she was playing quietly before the evening rush, the millionaire came in. He watched her from a distance for a while before walking up. "You've been busy," he said with a smile. She laughed lightly. "It feels like a dream," she said. "Everything that's happened. I still can't believe it," he nodded. "You earned it," he said. "Do you realize what you did that night?" People were moved. "That doesn't happen every day." She lowered her eyes. "I just played from the heart," she said. "That's why it worked," he replied softly. He sat at a nearby table while she continued playing. When she finished, he told her that he wanted to organize another event, a slightly bigger one this time, with a few invited guests and some media coverage. The idea made her nervous, but he reassured her that it would be small and comfortable. "You don't need to do anything fancy," he said. "Just be yourself," she hesitated. "I don't want people to think I'm doing this for fame," she said. He smiled gently. "Then don't do it for them. Do it for you." That night she thought long and hard about it. She remembered how it had felt to play again, how it had felt to make people feel something real. She didn't want to chase attention, but she also didn't want to hide anymore. She realized that music wasn't just something she used to love. It was something she needed. It was the one thing that made her feel whole. So she said yes. Over the next few weeks, she began to practice more seriously. She spent every spare hour at the music studio, learning new pieces, polishing old ones, and writing little melodies of her own. The teacher was amazed at how quickly she picked things up again. "It's like your fingers never forgot," he said once. She smiled, knowing that maybe he was right. The music had been sleeping inside her, waiting to wake up. The millionaire visited sometimes, bringing coffee or snacks during her breaks. He never acted like a businessman during those visits. He seemed more like a friend, genuinely interested in her progress. He told her stories about his younger years, how he used to love music but gave it up to focus on business. "Somewhere along the way I stopped feeling," he admitted once. "You reminded me of what it's like to care again." His words touched her deeply. She didn't fully understand why he was helping her, but she was grateful. Not because of the opportunities, but because he believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. Finally, the day of the second event came. This time it was held in a larger venue, a warm, softly lit hall filled with about 100 people. The audience was a mix of familiar faces and new ones. Cameras flashed occasionally, and there was a quiet buzz of excitement in the air. The millionaire greeted the guests while she waited backstage, trying to calm her nerves. Her palms were sweating and her stomach felt tight. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "It's just music. It's just me." When she walked out onto the stage, the crowd fell silent. The lights were soft again, not too bright, almost like the restaurant that first night. She sat at the piano and looked out at the faces watching her. She took a deep breath and began to play. The first song was one she had written herself. It started slow and delicate, then grew into something powerful and emotional. Every note told a story, her story. As she played, she stopped thinking about the people in the room. She wasn't performing, she was sharing. Halfway through, she glanced up and saw the millionaire standing at the back of the hall. He wasn't smiling this time. He looked deeply moved, his hands folded, his eyes glistening. She knew then that the music had reached him again. It made her want to play even better. The final note hung in the air before fading into silence. Then came the applause. Soft at first, then stronger, louder, until everyone was on their feet. She felt tears slip down her cheeks. She bowed her head, overwhelmed. It wasn't pride she felt. It was gratitude. After the performance, people came up to her, shaking her hand, thanking her for the music. A woman told her that her song reminded her of her late husband. A young man said it made him want to call his mother. A little girl hugged her and said she wanted to learn piano too. Each word felt like a gift. When the hall finally began to empty, the millionaire walked up to her quietly. "You did it again," he said softly. "You made them feel something real." She smiled through her tears. "I think I finally made myself feel something too," she whispered. He looked at her with quiet pride. "I want to help you take this further," he said. "If you're willing, I can introduce you to people who organize small tours, music gatherings, and nothing big yet, just small steps." She was speechless. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. "Say yes," he replied with a kind smile, "because this is only the beginning." That night when she got home, she placed her hands on the old keyboard she had recently bought secondhand. It wasn't a grand piano, but it was hers. She sat down and began to play softly, the melody flowing easily, peacefully. Her fingers moved with confidence, as if they finally knew their purpose again. Weeks turned into months and her life began to change quietly. She still worked part-time at the restaurant because she loved the people there, but now she also played at small local events, cafes, charity dinners, even a community theater show. Every performance brought her closer to the dream she once thought she had lost forever. People began to recognize her on the street. Some would smile and say, "You're the pianist from that video, right?" She always nodded shyly and thanked them. Fame wasn't what she wanted. Connection was. She loved when someone told her her music made them remember something good. That was what mattered. The millionaire continued to support her journey not as a sponsor but as a genuine friend. He often said that helping her had changed him more than he could explain. He began to spend less time at loud parties and more time attending charity events and supporting young artists. It was as if her music had awakened something kind in him that had been asleep for years. One evening, after another successful performance, they sat together on a quiet balcony overlooking the city. The lights below shimmered like stars. She turned to him and said softly, "Why did you help me? You didn't have to." He looked at her for a moment before answering, "Because once, a long time ago, someone believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I lost that along the way. You reminded me what it feels like to start again." She smiled, moved by his honesty. "I guess we both got a second chance," she said. He nodded. "Maybe we did." They sat in silence for a while, just listening to the faint sounds of the city. Car horns, footsteps, laughter in the distance. It felt peaceful. She realized that her life, once so ordinary and quiet, had become something unexpected and beautiful, not because of luck, but because she had dared to say yes when life offered her one more chance. When she went home that night, she played the same melody that had started it all, the song she had played in the restaurant that first night when everything changed. It still sounded the same, but it felt different now. It carried the weight of everything she had learned, everyone she had met, and every emotion she had poured into her music. As she played, tears filled her eyes, not from sadness, but from gratitude. She knew now that music wasn't just a talent. It was her voice, her story, her way of giving something back to the world. And somewhere she liked to believe that her father was listening, proud of the woman she had become. The next few months felt like a new season in her life. Everything around her seemed brighter. Even ordinary days carried a quiet joy. She had found a rhythm again, balancing her job at the restaurant with the growing invitations to perform. Her evenings were filled with piano rehearsals, her weekends with small performances, and her heart with something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Her music began to travel farther than she could imagine. People shared her performances online, and soon, Messages started to arrive from places she had never even visited. Some wrote about how her songs gave them comfort. Others said they listened every night before sleep. She would sit for hours reading those messages, feeling a mix of disbelief and gratitude. She never thought something as simple as her music could touch so many lives. One day, the millionaire came to the restaurant again. He sat at his usual corner table, quiet, thoughtful. After she finished her shift, he asked if she could join him for a moment. He looked more serious than usual. "There's something I want to talk to you about," he said, folding his hands on the table. She nodded, waiting. "You've come a long way," he said. "People are noticing you now. I've been approached by a few event organizers who want you to perform at a national charity gala next month. It'll be televised." Her breath caught for a moment. "Televised?" she repeated softly. He nodded. "Yes, it's a big stage. There'll be people from all over watching. It could open many doors for you." She felt a flutter in her chest, half excitement, half fear. "That sounds huge," she said quietly. "It is," he replied, "but I wouldn't suggest it if I didn't believe you were ready." She looked down at her hands. "I don't know if I'm ready for something that big," she whispered. "What if I mess up? What if they expect more than I can give?" He smiled kindly. "They don't want perfection. They want honesty. That's what makes your music special. You play from the heart. Just do that." She thought about it all night. The idea of playing in front of so many people frightened her, but she also knew that every step forward so far had scared her too. And yet, every time, something beautiful had come out of it. So the next day, she said yes. From that day on, her life became a blur of preparation. She practiced every morning before work and every night after. The teacher helped her refine each piece, working on the smallest details. The touch of her fingers, the pause between two notes, the way she breathed before beginning. She wanted every sound to mean something. The millionaire arranged for her to have access to a real grand piano at a nearby music hall, so she could get used to the stage environment. Sometimes he would sit quietly in the back while she practiced, just listening. He never gave too many suggestions. He simply let her play. But every time she looked up, his expression told her that he believed in her completely. On the day of the gala, she woke before sunrise. Her hands trembled slightly as she got ready. She wore a simple but elegant dress. Nothing flashy, just something that made her feel comfortable. When she arrived at the venue, her heart began to race. The hall was massive. Rows upon rows of seats, bright stage lights, and people moving everywhere with cameras and microphones. It was overwhelming. Backstage, she sat quietly, eyes closed, trying to calm her breathing. The millionaire came to see her before the show. "You look calm," he said softly. She smiled nervously. "I'm not," she admitted. He laughed gently. "That's good. It means you care. Just remember, you've already moved people with your music. Tonight is no different. It's just a bigger room." She took a deep breath and nodded. "Thank you," she said. When her turn came, she walked onto the stage slowly. The lights were bright, almost blinding, and for a moment she couldn't even see the audience. But then she sat down at the piano, touched the keys, and everything else disappeared. The first note echoed through the hall, soft and trembling, like a whisper. Then the melody began to grow, flowing through the space like a wave. It was a piece she had written herself, a mixture of hope, pain, and healing. Every sound carried a part of her story. Every pause carried a breath of memory. As she played, she forgot about the cameras, the lights, and the hundreds of eyes watching her. It felt like she was alone with the piano again, back in that quiet restaurant, just her and the music. When the final note faded, there was a long, deep silence. Then slowly the applause began, first soft, then stronger, then rising until it filled the hall completely. She stood and bowed, tears glimmering in her eyes. For the second time in her life, she had made a room full of strangers cry. After the performance, the organizers thanked her again and again. The media wanted interviews, but she kept them short and simple, saying only that she was grateful to share her music. What mattered to her most was when she saw the millionaire waiting at the side of the stage, clapping with a quiet smile. "You did it," he said as she came down. She laughed softly, still trembling from the adrenaline. "I can't even believe it's over," she said. "You'll believe it tomorrow when everyone's talking about it," he said with a wink. He was right. By the next morning, her performance was all over social media. The clip of her song spread faster than she ever imagined. People praised her authenticity, her emotion, the simplicity of her music that somehow felt universal. Her life began to change again. Calls, invitations, offers. Some people wanted her to record an album. Others wanted her to collaborate on projects. It was exciting but also a little frightening. She decided to take things slowly. She didn't want fame to change her. She still lived in the same apartment, still worked part-time at the restaurant, still practiced at the same old piano. She told herself that if she ever lost touch with that simple joy, the music would lose its meaning too. The millionaire respected that. He never pushed her to move faster. He said, "The world can wait. Real art doesn't rush." But something about him began to change too. He seemed calmer these days. The sharpness in his eyes, the restless energy he once carried, had softened. He started spending less time in business meetings and more time supporting charity events, often ones connected to the arts. When people asked him why, he would simply say, "Because I finally remembered what beauty feels like." One evening, after a small performance at a community center, she found him sitting alone by the stage looking at the piano thoughtfully. She walked over and sat beside him. "You've been quiet lately," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "Just thinking," he said. "About what?" He turned to look at her. "About how strange life is. One small moment can change everything. The day I dared you to play that piano, I thought it was just a joke. But it became the best thing I ever did," she smiled. "It changed everything for me too," she said. He nodded slowly. "You know, I used to think success was about money, deals, and numbers. But now I see it's about meaning, about doing something that outlives you." His voice carried a quiet sadness that she hadn't heard before. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. He looked away for a moment, then said, "I've been thinking of taking a break. Maybe traveling for a while, clearing my head. I want to see the world not through business, but through life." She nodded with understanding. "You deserve that," she said. "Sometimes we all need to step away to remember who we are." He smiled faintly. "Promise me something," he said. "Keep playing. No matter where life takes you. Promise me you'll never stop." "I promise," she said softly. The next few weeks went by quietly. She continued to play at small events and work on her own compositions. The millionaire left for his travels, sending occasional messages from different countries, pictures of sunsets, old music halls, and street musicians. Each message ended with the same words, "Keep playing." She missed his presence sometimes, especially during rehearsals when he used to listen silently from the back row. But she also understood that he needed this journey. After all, music had healed her. Perhaps life was trying to heal him too. Months later, she received a letter from him. It was handwritten, the ink slightly faded. He wrote about how he had visited a small town where a group of children played old instruments in a dusty classroom. He said their joy reminded him of her, the same purity, the same spark. He had decided to fund a program there to give those children better instruments and teachers. "I realize that what matters most is helping others find their song," he wrote. "That's what you taught me." She read the letter several times, tears in her eyes. She placed it in a small wooden box, next to a photo of her father and a folded piece of paper where she had once written her first song. That night, she sat at her piano and began to play something new. It was a soft melody at first, then it grew, filled with both joy and longing. It was a song for him, for the man who had believed in her when no one else did, who had changed her life with one simple dare. When she finished, she whispered quietly to herself, "Keep playing." And she did. Every day, every night, through laughter and tears, through change and silence, she kept playing. Her music became more than just sound. It became her story, her connection to everyone who had ever felt lost and then found again. And even though he was far away, she knew that somewhere in the world he was still listening. Months passed, and life began to feel like a quiet melody again. She continued to work at the restaurant part-time, though the place had changed since that night she first played there. More people started coming in just to hear her during the slow hours. The owner had even moved the old piano closer to the center of the room, and sometimes when the evening light poured through the windows, she would sit there and play while the guests ate. It became the restaurant's signature moment, the sound of her music floating through the air while people listened with smiles and soft hearts. The millionaire was still away traveling, but he sent messages every now and then, Sometimes a photo of a street musician in Paris, other times a short note about a new melody he had heard somewhere in Italy. Each message ended the same way, keep playing. She would smile every time she saw those words. It reminded her that someone out there believed in her even from miles away. One evening, after finishing her last song at the restaurant, a woman from a local radio station approached her. She introduced herself with a warm smile and said she had been following her story since the charity gala. She asked if she would be interested in recording one of her songs for a radio segment about inspiring musicians. The offer caught her by surprise. She had never recorded her music professionally before. "I don't know if I can," she said shyly. The woman laughed softly. "You already have in your own way," she replied. "All I need is what you do best, just play from your heart." After some hesitation, she agreed. The next week, she went to the small studio. It was nothing fancy, just a quiet room with a piano and a microphone. The recording team was kind and patient, letting her take her time. She decided to play the song she had written for the Millionaire, the one she played alone that night after reading his letter. It was soft, emotional, filled with gratitude and longing. When she finished, everyone in the room was silent. Then one of the technicians whispered, "That was beautiful." The song aired on the radio a few days later, and to her surprise, it quickly became popular. People started calling the station, asking about the pianist. They wanted to hear more. The station decided to release the recording online, and within weeks it spread across platforms. Messages poured in from people all over the world, some saying her music helped them through difficult times, others simply thanking her for reminding them of hope. One message stood out. It was from a small record label that focused on meaningful, emotional music. They offered to help her produce her first full album. It felt unreal. She sat for hours staring at the email, unsure whether to laugh, cry, or believe it was really happening. When she finally accepted, her life entered another chapter. The recording sessions were long, sometimes exhausting, but she loved every second of it. She wrote new pieces, songs inspired by her father, by the restaurant, by the people who had shown her kindness. Each track carried a story, a moment, a feeling. During the process, she often thought of the Millionaire. She wished he could hear what his one small act had created. Without that dare, none of this would have happened. She wanted to thank him again, to tell him how much his belief had changed her, but his messages had become less frequent lately. She figured he was busy or maybe just far away in a place without signal. The album finally released under the simple title, Echoes of Hope. To everyone's surprise, it became an instant success. Critics called it hauntingly pure, and a reminder that true art comes from emotion, not perfection. But she didn't care about the reviews. What mattered to her were the letters from listeners, ordinary people saying her songs made them cry, smile, or dream again. That was all she ever wanted. As her career began to rise, she promised herself one thing: she would never let fame change her. She still visited the restaurant every week, still helped her old co-workers when they were busy, and still greeted customers with the same gentle smile. People loved that about her, that she stayed humble even when the world started to notice her. A few months later, she was invited to perform at an award ceremony for new artists. It was a grand event, filled with bright lights and famous faces. She was nervous, but when she stepped onto the stage, something inside her calmed. The moment her fingers touched the piano, everything else faded away. The music flowed effortlessly, carrying her heart to every corner of the room. When she finished, the applause was overwhelming. People stood clapping and cheering, and she felt tears forming in her eyes. After the performance, she went backstage to catch her breath. Reporters wanted interviews, but she politely declined. She just wanted a quiet moment alone. Then, as she sat down and took a sip of water, she saw someone standing by the doorway. For a moment, she thought her mind was playing tricks on her, but then he smiled, the same calm, knowing smile she had missed for months. The Millionaire had returned. She froze for a moment, then stood up quickly. "You're here," she said, her voice trembling slightly. He nodded. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," he said softly. "I heard your music everywhere I went." "You're incredible." She smiled, eyes glistening. "I was hoping you'd hear it someday," she said. He laughed lightly. "I did, in more ways than one." They sat together for a while, talking about everything: his travels, her recordings, the places he had seen, the people she had met. He looked healthier, calmer, like someone who had found peace after a long search. "I saw your charity program online," she said. "The one helping children learn music. It's beautiful," he smiled. "It's your fault," he said jokingly. "You reminded me what music can do." "I figured the least I could do was help others find it too," she laughed softly. "That's the best kind of fault." He looked at her with a warmth that said more than words could. "You've done something rare," he said. "You turned a moment of chance into a life of meaning." She shook her head gently. "You gave me that chance," she said. "If you hadn't dared me that night, I might still be serving tables wishing for something more." He smiled. "Maybe," he said. "But something tells me you would have found your way anyway. You were meant to play." Later that evening, they left the venue together and walked through the quiet streets. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement and the air was cool and calm. For a while, they didn't say anything. They didn't need to. The silence between them was peaceful, filled with unspoken understanding. As they reached the corner where they had to part ways, he turned to her and said, "I'm organizing a concert next month. It's for charity again, this time for children who can't afford instruments. I'd like you to headline it." Her eyes widened slightly. "Me? Who else?" he said with a small smile. "You're the reason it exists." She hesitated, touched but unsure. "I don't know if I deserve that," she said quietly. He shook his head. "You do," he said simply. "You've earned every bit of it." She agreed, and for the next few weeks they worked together to plan the concert. It would be held at a beautiful old theater, the kind that still carried the echoes of history in its walls. The event would feature young musicians, most of them from humble backgrounds, getting the chance to perform for the first time. She helped choose the lineup, met each child personally, and even gave them small lessons and encouragement before the show. She saw herself in them, the same nervous excitement, the same hope shining in their eyes. On the night of the concert, the hall was packed. The Millionaire stood backstage, helping to coordinate everything. She performed last, saving her most emotional piece for the finale. Before walking out, she looked at the children waiting behind her, their faces glowing with pride. "You did wonderful," she told them softly. "Remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about feeling." Then she stepped onto the stage. The moment she began to play, the audience went still. The melody was gentle, then strong, carrying every emotion she had lived. The struggle, the courage, the gratitude, the hope. Halfway through, she looked toward the wings of the stage and saw the Millionaire watching her with quiet pride. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and she smiled. When the final note faded, the hall erupted with applause. People stood again, clapping endlessly, some with tears on their faces. The children ran out to join her on stage, laughing and hugging her. The Millionaire stepped out too, announcing that the concert had raised enough money to buy instruments for dozens of schools. The crowd cheered louder. That night, as they sat together after the event, he said softly, "Do you realize what you've done?" She smiled. "I just played." He shook his head. "You did more than that. You gave others a reason to believe again." She looked at him, her eyes warm. "We both did," she said. They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the faint echoes of the evening's music. It was strange how one simple dare, one spontaneous moment, had grown into something so big and beautiful. Life, she thought, was a lot like music. Sometimes you start on a wrong note. Sometimes you stumble through a few bars, but if you keep going, the melody finds you again. And when it does, it's more beautiful than you could have ever planned. She glanced at the piano on the stage, still glowing under the soft lights, and whispered, "Keep playing." The Millionaire smiled, knowing exactly what she meant. The concert changed everything. Overnight, it became a story that touched millions of hearts. Newspapers wrote about it, and clips of her performance filled social media again. People were moved not just by her music, but by the message behind it, the way one small act of kindness could grow into something powerful enough to change lives. The next morning, she woke up to hundreds of messages from strangers all over the world. Some were parents thanking her for inspiring their children to learn music again. Others were from struggling musicians who said her journey gave them the courage to keep going. There were messages from teachers who played her songs in classrooms, and even from hospitals where her music was helping patients relax and heal. She sat by her window holding a cup of tea, reading message after message until her eyes filled with tears. It wasn't fame that touched her, it was connection. She realized that her story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told to give up and still found a way to rise again. Later that day, the millionaire came to see her. He looked happy, more peaceful than she had ever seen him. The concert had done something to him too. It had brought him back to the person he used to be before life became a race for success. They sat together in the small cafe near the old restaurant where it all began. The same warm light came through the windows, and the sound of quiet music played in the background. He looked around and said softly, "It feels strange being back here." "This is where everything started," she smiled. "It's funny, isn't it? One small moment can change a lifetime." He nodded. "You know, after that concert, I realized something. We've both spent years chasing different things. Me chasing success, you chasing meaning. But in the end, what really matters is what we give back." She looked at him thoughtfully. "I think that's what music does," she said. "It gives something back. Even when life takes things away, the music gives it meaning again." He smiled quietly at that. For a while, they both just sat there, lost in thought, remembering the journey that had brought them here. The dare, the silence of that first night, the long road of fear, hope, and rediscovery. After that day, they began working together more often. The charity organization grew bigger, reaching new places each month. They opened small music centers for children who couldn't afford lessons. They donated old instruments, restored pianos, and organized community events where kids could perform in front of their families. Every event brought new faces, new stories, and new smiles. The millionaire used his connections and resources, but it was her presence that made everything feel real. Whenever she visited a center, the children ran to greet her, shouting her name, asking her to play something. And she always did. She played simple songs that the kids could hum along to, laughing when they tried to copy her notes. Those moments became her favorite part of life, the laughter of children mixed with the sound of the piano. Months turned into years, and her name became known around the world, not just as a pianist but as a symbol of hope. She was invited to perform in cities across the globe, and each time, she carried her message with her, that no dream is too small, and no kindness is ever wasted. But even with all the success, she stayed grounded. She still visited the old restaurant sometimes, sitting at the same piano, playing for whoever happened to be there. The owner would smile and say, "You'll never forget this place, will you?" She would laugh softly and say, "How could I? This is where I found my voice." One winter evening, after a long day of teaching at one of the new centers, she got a call from the millionaire. His voice sounded softer than usual, a little tired. He told her he wasn't feeling well and was resting at his countryside home. She offered to visit, and he agreed, saying he would like that. The next morning, she took the train to see him. The house was quiet, surrounded by trees, and the air was cool and calm. When she entered, he was sitting by the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket, a faint smile on his face. "You look better than you sound," she said teasingly. He chuckled softly. "I've had worse days." They talked for hours, about the children, the new projects, the next concert. But at some point his voice grew quiet. He looked at her for a long moment before saying, "Do you remember the night I dared you to play?" She smiled. "How could I forget? I never told you this," he said. "But that night I was in a bad place. I had everything money could buy, but nothing that felt real. When you started playing, I realized how empty I'd become. That song, it woke something in me." She looked at him with soft eyes. "You never told me that," she whispered. He nodded. "I didn't know how to. But now I just want you to know. Meeting you changed me. You reminded me that life isn't about winning. It's about feeling, about giving, about creating moments that matter." Her eyes grew misty. "You changed me too," she said. "You gave me back my dream." He smiled weakly. "Then I guess we're even." She reached out and held his hand gently. They sat in silence, listening to the crackle of the fire. Outside, snow began to fall slowly, covering the world in white. Before she left that evening, he asked her to play something on the piano in the corner of the room. It was an old instrument, slightly out of tune, but she smiled and sat down anyway. She played the song that had started it all, the same melody from that first night in the restaurant. The notes filled the room with warmth, floating through the quiet air. He closed his eyes and listened, a peaceful expression on his face. When she finished, he whispered, "That's the sound of life." She smiled softly. "It's the sound of thank you." A few days later, he passed away peacefully in his sleep. The news broke her heart, but she found comfort in knowing he had left the world better than he found it. He had lived his final years helping others, creating beauty, and rediscovering what it meant to feel alive. She organized a small memorial concert in his honor. It wasn't a grand event, just close friends, children from the music centers, and people whose lives he had touched. She played one last piece that night, one she had written for him. It was gentle and full of light, like the sound of gratitude turned into music. As she played, tears streamed down her face, but her heart felt full. She knew he was somewhere listening, smiling like he always did. After the concert, she walked outside alone. The night sky was clear, the stars glowing softly. She looked up and whispered, "Thank you for believing in me." Years went by, but his legacy lived on through her and the thousands of lives they had changed together. The music centers continued to grow, reaching more countries, more children, more dreams. Every building carried a small plaque with a simple message engraved on it: "Keep playing." Those two words became a symbol of hope. People painted them on school walls, printed them on posters, and even tattooed them on their arms. To the world, it became a reminder to never give up, to keep going no matter how hard life gets. As for her, she continued to play, not for fame or recognition, but because it was the purest way she knew to keep their story alive. Each note she played was a thank you, each melody a memory. One day, years later, she returned to the old restaurant. It looked a little different now, renovated, brighter, but the piano still sat in the corner. She walked over, ran her fingers across the keys, and smiled. A young waiter approached her and said, "Are you the pianist from that story everyone talks about?" She laughed softly. "Maybe," she said. He grinned. "Would you play something for us?" She nodded and sat down. For a moment she hesitated, feeling the weight of time and memory. Then she began to play. The sound flowed through the room, warm, familiar, full of life. People stopped eating, stopped talking, and slowly turned to listen. It felt like the first night all over again. When the last note faded, the restaurant was silent, then slowly filled with gentle applause. She smiled, stood up, and looked around the room. So much had changed, and yet somehow everything felt the same. She whispered quietly to herself. It all started here. As she walked outside that evening, the sun was setting, painting the sky in gold and pink. The air was cool, the city alive with sound. She closed her eyes for a moment and felt a calm peace in her heart. Somewhere deep inside, she could still hear his voice saying those two simple words that had carried her through everything. Keep playing. And she did. Through every stage, every note, every moment, she kept playing for him, for her father, for the children, for everyone who had ever needed to be reminded that beauty can grow even from the hardest days. Her story became a song the world never forgot. A song that began with a dare, but ended with a purpose. A song that proved that sometimes, all it takes is one person believing in you, and one note to change everything.